My guests today are Wayne Bobby, Vice President at Workday Federal, and Michelle Altmans, a Federal Solutions Strategist at Workday. And I'm your moderator, Nicole Grisco. So before we went to break there, we were talking about the challenges that agencies have in recruiting, especially that younger demographic who, as Michelle and Wayne both mentioned, do at least seem to have an appetite for public service. So Wayne, I wonder, from your perspective, what are some of those specific challenges that agencies have and maybe tapping into that younger talent base, and maybe some solutions there that, maybe they're still trying to implement?
I was going to comment, Nicole, there that so in today's environment, it's hard not to find an issue or an agency where someone's not passionate about it, whether you're passionate about foreign affairs, State Department, Agency for International Development, whether you're passionate for defense or homeland security, whether you're passionate about the environment. So there's a lot to believe in and want to be a part of in terms of making a difference in today's world. So I think there's a lot of attractive things about the federal government that people are interested in supporting and being a part of something they can believe in. Then you kind of turn that a bit to say, okay, so what kind of experience do we give those potential candidates as they apply for a job? So, the first impression they're going to get is applying for a job, whether it's through USA Jobs or whatever interaction they have with that agency. Did we create an impression there that really makes them want to lean in and really pursue that job that much harder? Or did they apply for a job online and then it kind of falls into a big basket and they haven't heard back for a couple of weeks? Or did you create that interaction that would be an exciting recruiting, onboarding, effort? And that's what organizations are moving to now. I mean, you hear today of millennials that are applying for a job on their iPhone. Well, who would have thought of that years ago? And so there's a lot of neat things you can do to kind of create that excitement and give that interaction between that candidate and that employer, to really, when somebody does have that excitement, to kind of keep that passion in motion.
Michelle, I'd like to expand that question a little bit more with you here.
Sure.
So how do agencies actually do that? I mean, on one hand, they're juggling just a large, vast number of applicants. It's perhaps difficult for them to track that number in the system. It's difficult to find out who is actually serious about pursuing public service. And then, as Wayne mentioned, it's difficult to kind of create that impression, a welcoming impression, and perhaps an innovative one that maybe agencies aren't really doing at this point. So I just wonder, from your perspective, how can agencies actually move in that direction?
It's a combination of things. I mean, certainly, at Workday, we have a technology platform that helps, sort of manage that process, right? And give people visibility into information as to who's applied and where they are in the process, and automation that goes along with that, so that we can ensure that we're keeping folks moving forward in the process, so that they don't feel like they were stuck in a basket and no one talked to them for 3 weeks. So, I mean, that's part of it. There's a technology foundation there, and there are technology tools available in the marketplace that can help agencies, modernize that and spend less time sort of on the technology itself and more time on the experience, because I think that's really where that's where you want to get to. I mean, these folks that are applying for jobs now, and from 35 down, they're digitally native. They've grown up with this technology. They understand how all those things work. So that's not new to them. But where I think that piece could be missing is then, how do we make sure that we're keeping those communication channels open, right? And that we are keeping people apprised as to where they are in the process, and that we're continuing to push information out to them as candidates that says, hey, this is something that's great that's going on within our agency. We know that you've applied, just wanted to keep you in the loop, right? There's a lot of tools and technologies out there that can help agencies sort of transform that process. So it's not just about the technology platform, but it's also about thinking as an agency of, how do you market yourself to these folks that are applying to your organization, and how do you keep them interested along the journey, essentially?
Right. And I have to imagine that another piece of that equation is telling your applicants that, unlike the past, I think we are seeing some of these federal agencies embrace flexibilities that they were not embracing 2 years ago, things like telework, remote work, but also more flexible work hours, other flexibilities if you're, a parent and have children at home. This could be for either one of you, but what are you seeing in that space? Are you seeing agencies embrace that, and what can agencies do to maybe better advertise that, but then also continue to provide that support to their employees?
Well, there's certainly a trend towards that, and COVID kind of like put an HOV lane in terms of getting to that. I think that generationally where we are now is what does it take to get the job done? Not did you punch in at 8:30 and punch out at 5 o'clock, but what does it take to get the job done? And in the course of that period of time or by that deadline, did you get it done? And then if people have to leave at noon to go pick up their child at daycare, that's okay, right? So because you're still able to get the job done, whether over the course of that day you can get the job done. I think that's becoming the more important trend. But that's taken some adjustment and getting used to that. I go back to my days in the federal government. I used to account for every 15 minutes of my time. Today, people would say, "Why you bother me with that? Who cares? Just get the job done." So I think that's a mindset, but I think we are kind of there now, and COVID kind of made that happen much faster.
Yeah, absolutely. I think COVID has really definitely changed that perspective. And in fact, I'm actually a little bit surprised at how I was expecting a lot of the agencies to be back in the office by now, right? And a lot of agencies aren't. They're continuing the, for occupations that allow that, right? And allow that flexibility. They're allowing, folks to still be, remote for the next period of time. And I think that will continue to evolve. And there's always going to be occupations and particular fields that require that, on-site present, sort of community within an agency, but where they can, even with those particular organizations or occupations, look at, some ways of flexibility, that's always going to work in their favor, because that's really, folks are looking for ways to manage that work-life balance, I think in a little bit different way than they used to.
Absolutely. And, I think as we've been talking about challenges with recruiting, hiring, especially that younger demographic, on one hand, the federal government hasn't always had this mindset of being, real change agents. They're not necessarily out front and center doing the latest and greatest when it comes to using technology or other things on that spectrum. But at the same time, we have seen agencies make a pretty quick pivot to this new sort of operating environment. Just speaking about that more, taking a step back and speaking about this broadly, from your perspective, Wayne, Michelle, what works as far as quickly adapting to change? Are there best practices that you've seen in working with large organizations and maybe modernizing that work well that agencies might be able to apply as they think about, modernizing their workforce and the hiring systems that go along with it?
Well, one thing that I'm seeing that's opened people's eyes, particularly during this whole COVID period, is people examining some of these business applications that they have running behind the scenes. Because all we talked about today has been around human resources and staffing and hiring, recruiting, and then kind of a career path of an individual. And you see in a lot of agencies that many of those systems, are solutions that go in support of all that, reside in multiple different areas, right, inside the agency. And when they sort of examined it, said, well, we've captured all the data about our employees, getting back to data here, but we captured all the information and data about our employees, and we have them all into a database now, and we can start to do analysis about them over the course of time. shouldn't that be our first source of where we go? And I'll relate that to a recent story, because we talked to a federal agency CIO, and who asked Workday, so how do you guys handle vaccine management? And we explained that in our HR system, that's where people record that they have been vaccinated or not. And then each day they get, an email asking them to do a daily acknowledgement that they are not sick, they're not having any of these symptoms. And if you certify to that and you have in fact been vaccinated, then that will determine whether your badge will work that day at the Workday office. Okay. And that's the, I was, well, what a great idea that was by Workday. But all we did was tie back what accesses people have back to your HR database, because that's where you're storing all the information about your people. So I think that what folks should start to look at is, where are we going to collect this data, and how are we going to use that data, and what expectations we put on those systems? Again, don't just become data rich and information poor. Can that data drive us the information, to the metrics, to the decision support tools that we need long term? That's just one of a number of examples we could share. I'm sure Michelle has more.
Yeah, I think that, part of the other challenge with a lot of these organizations is that they are so large, right? And they have a very a population of folks that cross all kinds of different occupations and all kinds of different personnel classifications. And so I think when we think about modernization of technology, which I do think is really a huge change agent for an organization, but I also think it's also an ability for them to insulate themselves from sort of getting out of date. So it's a dual-edged sword there. But when you're thinking about, that modernization effort, maybe think about it in smaller chunks. Think about it from perhaps a population perspective. And maybe there are certain areas where we can gain efficiencies, maybe faster, right? By taking sort of a segmented approach, as opposed to this idea that we have to do everything agency-wide all the time. And I think that also may, just as we start to think about how do we evolve these technology platforms to make them more agile as we continue to grow and develop our organization, where can we start, and where's the right place to start, so that we're getting value from those projects sooner rather than later?
Well, Michelle, I think that is a good place to leave it. Some sage advice there. Take it one step at a time. Embrace kind of smaller steps along the way. So I'd like to thank today's guests, Wayne Bobby, Vice President at Workday Federal, and Michelle Altmans, a Federal Solutions Strategist at Workday. I'm your moderator, Nicola Grisco, and you're listening to Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search Workday.